Hey, what's going on, APUSH peeps? We have Key Concept 4.3 for you today. This is the revised version of it, the most up-to-date video you will find on Key Concept 4.3. Before we begin, it's shout-out times. Huge shout-outs to the following classes. We have Mr. Pippin's class, Mr. Johnson's class, and Mr. Hackett's class in Massachusetts. Thank you all so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you want to shout out to your teacher, leave it in the comment section, and I'll get to it in a future video. All right, Key Concept 4.3 states the U.S. interest in increasing foreign trade and expanding its national borders shaped the nation's foreign policy and spurred government and private initiatives. That's from page 50. If you haven't downloaded this yet, check a link in the description. You need to know this. So some big idea questions you should be able to answer at the conclusion of this video. What was the message of and impact of the Monroe Doctrine? And how did westward expansion lead to conflicts over slavery? That will be a theme continuing into period 5 as well. Make sure you know that and understand it. All right, Key Concept 4.3, Roman numeral 1. Struggling to create an independent global presence, the United States sought to claim territory throughout the North American continent and promote foreign trade. That is also from page 50. So what we'll see is that after the Louisiana Purchase, the U.S. will seek to increase its influence in North America through the following ways. We have exploration right after, a few years after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. We have the Lewis and Clark expedition. And Lewis and Clark were aides to Jefferson, and they sought to find a waterway to this Pacific Ocean. Obviously, they never found that, but they did gain immense knowledge about the environment and natives on the land they just purchased from the French. Military actions were another way to increase influence. We have the Aroostook War, which settled the Maine-Canada boundary dispute. So our present-day boundaries between Maine and Canada were established as a result of this in the 1830s. We have American Indian removal as well. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, which led to later the Trail of Tears, which forced many natives to move west of the Mississippi River. And here is a map of the forced removal of Native Americans to go beyond the Mississippi River into present-day Oklahoma. There were diplomatic efforts as well, specifically the Monroe Doctrine, which warned Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. President James Monroe, through the Monroe Doctrine, basically said to Europe, you guys have a different government than us. You are not to try to recolonize any of these newly independent nations in Latin America, and you need to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And in return, the United States would stay out of European affairs. And here's a great political cartoon that illustrates the Monroe Doctrine. You'll notice that the U.S., according to this cartoon, has Uncle Sam's hat right in Latin America. So this will increase the U.S.'s involvement in Latin America in years to come, as we shall see. Those that were living on the frontier tended to favor expansion, those Americans, and this would allow for more land to be available for farming. Now, with expansion comes resistance by Native Americans. We have the Black Hawk War, which was in Illinois in 1832, and Abe Lincoln was actually a part of this, although he did not see any combat. Native Americans, they sought to gain land that they ceded to the U.S. government in 1804 back. They were unsuccessful. In the Seminole Wars, this was a series of wars in the early to mid-19th century. The first Seminole War forced Seminole natives of Florida to move to Central Florida. And then the second one will see the removal of the Seminoles from Florida. So we see here, as the U.S. is expanding, there will be many calls from Americans to remove Native Americans from this land. Key Concept 4.3, Roman numeral 2 states the United States acquisition of lands in the West gave rise to contests over the extension of slavery into new territories. So there's this spread of the plantation slavery west of the Appalachian Mountains. Now let's think back. We first were introduced to the Appalachian Mountains in 1763. Do you remember why they were so important in 1763? You know this. That's right, the Proclamation Line of 1763, which the British government said the colonists could not expand west of. Very good, nice memory. So the Deep South refers, also known as the Cotton Belt, this refers to new states like Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, which had a lot of fertile soil for the production of cotton. Many slaveholders began to move to more fertile land west of the Appalachians because cotton, similar to tobacco from colonial days, that exhausted the land. It destroyed the land, and there was a constant need for new fertile soil. Now, during this time, we begin to see anti-slavery efforts increase in the North, and it's important to note that women's rights and abolitionism were closely linked. Those two reform movements were very, very closely linked. I can't stress enough, you need to know that. An example is Lydia Maria Child. She was an abolitionist and a women's rights advocate. And we also have a very well-known author from New England, William Lloyd Garrison, who published a weekly newspaper from 1831 to 1865 called The Liberator. And this advocated the immediate and uncompensated end to slavery. He wanted slavery to end now, today, this moment, and slave owners, he believed, should not be paid or compensated for the loss of their slaves. Now let's jump on over to slavery in the South, and 3 out of 4 people in the South did not own slaves. However, the institution was very prolific down in the South. Slavery was defended by many Southern leaders and writers. We talked about Key Concept 4.2 video. This guy, John C. Calhoun, argued that slavery was a positive good, and a very well-known writer, George Fitzhugh, would write about slavery in terms of being better than factory workers in the North. So a lot of people in the South began to defend slavery during this time and actually called it a good or positive thing. The Missouri Compromise is also known as the Compromise of 1820, and there are 3 parts. You have to know all 3 parts. I have a detailed video as well in the description. Make sure you check it out. 1, Missouri would enter the country as a slave state. So this is the first state carved out of the Louisiana Purchase territory that wants to enter the United States as a slave state. This would tip the balance in favor of the slave states, so part of the compromise would allow for Maine to enter the country as a free state. Maine once belonged to Massachusetts. Now it's its own state and is emerging as a free state. And then we also have this line known as the 36-30 line, and it is right here below Missouri. Everything above this in the future, all this green territory over here, would be admitted as free. Everything below it down here would be admitted as slave states. This is the 3rd part of the compromise. Now, eventually we'll find out in period 5 this gets overturned. Now, the impact is that tension still existed. It was a temporary solution between defenders and supporters of slavery. People like Thomas Jefferson absolutely hated the Missouri Compromise. He talks about it. This geographical line will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper. So he was arguing that this will divide the North and the South, and he was right. And in the 1850s, tensions would come to the forefront. We'll eventually see the Missouri Compromise is repealed, but it was a temporary solution to the issue of slavery in the territories. Okay, let's go over some test tips for you for multiple choice and short answer. Be able to identify and explain examples of U.S. seeking dominance in North America and the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine, and the removal of Native Americans as well. Conflicts with Native Americans, be able to identify and describe one or two of them. The Missouri Compromise, absolutely know all 3 parts and that it was a temporary solution. And for essay questions, what were the impacts of westward expansion on natives and on tensions between the North and the South, which of course would include slavery. All right, guys, look forward to seeing you right back here for Key Concept 5.1, in which we will talk about manifest destiny, a very important topic that will help lead to the Civil War. I thank you guys very much for watching, and have a good day.